With the cost of living crisis affecting everyone, it's essential to get control of your finances so you don't leave yourself short. I've put together this interactive personal budget tracking spreadsheet designed for use into future years. It's super quick and easy to use for multiple bank accounts all in one place, and it gives you a handle on your financial position at a glance. It highlights problem areas, and you can drill down to identify the cause and take corrective action to get back on track. You can download the template for free from the link in the video description, but continue watching as I step through how to use it and how it's constructed so that you can customize it for your specific needs. Now, I know it might look complicated, but I promise it's point and click easy to build. It contains 0 code and only 4 simple formulas, and I've done that because formulas are easy to break, and the last thing you want is a personal budget spreadsheet telling you you have more money than you actually do. I've also included a bonus savings tracker because you'll need to start doing something with all your spare cash once you get your finances under control. Now I'm going to step through it at a reasonably fast pace. If you find it's too fast, use the video settings to change the playback speed. The first thing we need to do is create a list of income and expenses we expect to have. You can see I've started a list of subcategories, which I've then organized into larger groups to help us analyze spending, and then a column to mark them as expense or income. And before we add any more items, I need to format this in an Excel table, and I'll use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-T. My table has headers, so I'll check the box and click OK. This is just going to make it easy for Excel to reference. Let's give the table a new name. I'll call this table categories, and let's change the color to in keeping with the page theme. Now this list is fully customizable, so let's add a new item for motor vehicle fuel. And notice when you enter it on the very next available row, the table expands to include it in its range. This means that anything referencing this table will automatically be able to see the new item. No further editing of formulas, etc. required. Now here I've used emojis in my category names to help us more quickly identify them at a glance. To insert an emoji, use the Windows key and the semicolon. Search for the emoji that's going to suit your needs. I'm going to go with the car because this is for transport, and then into the category type. This is an expense, obviously. Now if you need to delete any items, simply delete an entire row. That's the safest. Let me quickly add the rest of my items. Now we'll be using the subcategories in other tables via data validation drop-down lists. To make them easy to reference, I'm going to define them as a name. So I'll select them, and then via the Formulas tab, I want Define Name. And here I'm going to call them subcategories. Notice it picks up the name of the table and column. If you have an earlier version of Excel, you might get an error when you click OK. If so, there's a link in the video description to a workaround. Now that we've set up the foundation of our report, we're ready to prepare the budget. And because you've already seen how to insert a table, to save time, I've gone ahead and set up the budget table, and we can see it's called Budget. The first column contains the year. Remember, this template is designed to use for many years, so you can just continue adding rows to this table for future years. The next column contains the subcategory, and we simply select it from the drop-down list. To set up a drop-down list, select the column, and then on the Data tab of the ribbon, Data Validation. Here I want a list, and you can see I've already entered my source, which is the subcategory's name we just set up. Now if you can't remember the name, press the F3 key, brings up the list of names, and you can simply insert it. I won't do it again. I'll click OK, and then your drop-down list will be available. Now just note that income has been entered as a positive value and expenses get entered as negatives. And again, any new items get added on the very next row under the table. And if the amount is the same for every month, simply left click and drag it to fill across. Otherwise, enter the amounts individually. So we've got 700 for our vacation in March and 800 in August. Okay, that's the budget done. Now we're ready to record our actual spend in the transactions table. Now you can copy and paste the transactions in from a bank statement for the date, description, debit, and credit columns. Then all you need to do is enter the account that the transactions relate to, and this allows you to record multiple accounts in the one table. And finally, select the subcategory from the list. Now if you ever want to dive deeper into your transactions, you can use the filter buttons. Here we can choose the account, or we can filter by date, and there are lots of date filters we can choose from here, or description, right down to specific text filters, and so on. And to make this even easier, I'm going to add some slices for this table. So with the table selected, on the Insert tab of the ribbon, Slicer, and I want a slice of the account and the subcategory, and I'll click OK. Let's select them both. I'll bring them roughly into place. Let's color them in keeping with the table. And I'll just quickly do some formatting. I'll give this slicer 4 columns and we'll just stretch it across there. And now with the slicer, I can filter for a specific account, right down to the subcategory, and I can continue filtering. Say, for example, I wanted to filter into a specific date. I can also use the filter buttons. Let's click the clear filters and we're back to normal. Now, side note, if you wanted, you could add another column to the table for notes for each transaction. So to recap, you need to decide what categories you need. That's a one-time job. Once a year, set up your budget. The first time you do this will be the hardest, and then every year after that, you'll have your actual spend nicely analysed, and you can simply copy that as a starting point for next year's budget. And then once a month, copy your bank transactions into this table, tag them with the account and the subcategory, and then all you need to do is go to the report sheet, and then on the Data tab of the ribbon, click Refresh All, and then your report will be ready. Next, we need to combine the 3 tables into one dataset that we can easily summarize. And the quickest and easiest way to do this is with Power Query. Don't be put off by the name of this tool. It is super easy to use, and the nice thing is you only have to do this once. So I'm going to start by loading the category table, and we do that via the Data tab of the ribbon from Table Range. This opens the Power Query editor window where I can perform more data cleaning tasks. Now this data is already clean, so I'm going to close and load 2. And here I want only create a connection. And on the Data tab of the ribbon, Queries and Connections opens the Queries and Connections pane, and you can see I've got one query for my categories table. All right, let's go to the budget table and we'll do the same from Table Range. Now the budget table is in a great layout for us to enter our budget data, but this layout with values split across many columns for the months is not easy for Excel to summarize, so let's fix that. The year and subcategory columns are correct, so holding Shift, I'll select them both, and then right-click, Unpivot Other Columns. And now we have our month and our budget amounts in their own columns, which is the correct layout. Next, I need to create a proper date column. So I'll select the month column and then holding Control, select the year column, and then right-click, Merge Columns. And here I'm going to use a custom separator, which is a hyphen. And this column will be called Date. Click OK, and there's our date. Now at the moment it is still in a text format, so clicking on the drop down here, I can change the data type to Date. Now you can see I have a proper date for the first of each month. By the way, my dates are formatted day, month, year, but Power Query will respect your locale and format the dates based on your PC settings. Lastly, let's rename this column Budget. Just double click to rename it. Notice in the Applied Steps pane, Power Query has recorded all the steps, much like recording a macro. And this means that when I update my budget table, Power Query can perform all these steps again without me having to go through all this setup. All right, let's close and load 2. And again, only create connection. And then let's go to the transactions table and we'll load that in. Now you notice here the debit and credit columns have null values where cells were empty. And ordinarily this would be okay, but I need to perform a calculation on these columns in a moment and it will fail with null values. So with them selected on the Transform tab, I'm going to replace values. The value to find is null. Now Power Query is case sensitive, so make sure you spell it with lowercase n. And I'm replacing it with a 0. That's that done. Now I'm going to select the credit column and then holding Control select the debit column. And I'm going to add a column that subtracts one from the other. It gives it the default name subtraction, and I can either double click here to change the name, or I can change it up in the formula bar. We'll call this actual. And notice we now have our income as positive and our expenses are negative values. Now I can select the debit and credit columns and press the delete key. I don't need them anymore. One important point is Power Query doesn't alter the source data. It's creating a separate view of the data for our report. And while I could have created this new column for actual with a formula, doing it in Power Query means there's no formulas that I need to maintain or that can accidentally get broken. Plus, it's actually more efficient for Excel to do these calculations in Power Query. Okay, now that we have our tables cleaned and transformed, I can append the budget and transactions together. So with the transaction table selected, on the Home tab of the ribbon, I'm going to append queries as new. First table is my transactions and the second one is my budget. Click OK. And now we have a new table with our transactions and budget. Let's call this data. And let's fix the date format and just make it a date rather than date time as it currently is. The next thing I want to do is bring the category and category type fields into my data table. And I can do this by merging tables. And you can think of merging like doing a VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP from one table to another. So from the data table on the Home tab, I'm going to merge queries. The top table is my data table, and the table I want to merge with is my category table. And the column they have in common is subcategory, so just select that in both. That is, we're looking up the subcategory in the data table, finding it in the categories table, and bringing in the category and category type. Now the join defaults to left outer, which is fine because it's going to keep everything in my data table and only bring in matching rows from the category table. So I'll click OK. And now I have a new column that contains the category table. Clicking on the double arrow, here I can select the columns that I want to bring in. Now I already have subcategory, so let's deselect that, and I don't want to use the original column name as prefix. Click OK. And just like a lookup formula, but easier, Power Query has looked up the categories table and brought in the corresponding category and category type for each subcategory in this table. Next, I'm going to select the date column, and then on the Add Column tab under Date, I'm going to add a column for the year, and then repeat that and add a column for the month. We need these fields for our charts. Now, if you're familiar with pivot tables, you might be thinking that I can just group these date fields to get month and year. But as you'll see soon, I'm going to build this profit and loss pivot table with calculated fields, and I can't have group fields in the same data set. All right, we're ready to start creating the charts. So I'm going to go to the Home tab and close and load to. And here I'm just going to create a connection because I haven't loaded my transactions or my data table yet, and I don't want either of them loaded. In order to use the data table in a pivot table, I need to right click and change the load to settings just for the data table. And here I'm going to choose pivot chart. I'm going to put it on an existing worksheet, which I already have set up, called analysis. And we'll pop it in this cell here. Let's click OK. It inserts a pivot table and pivot chart placeholder, and I'm ready to build my pivot chart. If you want to use Power Query in other areas of your work to improve productivity by automating boring and laborious tasks like these, check out my course linked to in the video description. The first chart is going to plot actual versus budget expenses by category. So I want category, actual, and budget. Now I need to filter this chart to only show expenses. So I'm going to insert a slicer on the Insert tab, Slicer, for the category type. Let's bring it over beside the pivot table, resize it just a little bit, and choose Expense. In the pivot table, I want to right click and sort the values smallest to largest. And then I'm going to format the numbers with a custom number format. So down to Custom, and in here, I want the $, hash, comma, hash, hash, 0, underscore, close parentheses. And then the semicolon separates the formats. So next is the negative value format. So open parentheses, $, hash, comma, hash, hash, 0, close parentheses. And you get a preview of what it's going to look like up there. So click OK. In Australia and the UK, we call parentheses brackets, and that reminds me of a mnemonic I used to share when I'd hand out the monthly management reports to non-finance people back when I was a financial controller in London, which is brackets are bad news. And that will apply to your own personal budget where negative values and negative variances are undesirable. So remember, brackets are bad news. Right, let's repeat the formatting for the budget. Go to Custom and scroll to the end, and your new format is always at the bottom. Click OK. And now those values are going to feed through to the chart with the formatting. All right, let's quickly do some formatting for the chart. First of all, I'll go to the Design tab and we're going to change the chart type because this should be a bar chart. And then I'm going to right click on the fill buttons and hide them all because they take up way too much space. And then selecting the horizontal axis, Control 1. And then over here, I want values in reverse order and label position, I want high. It's going to look all wrong for a moment, so just bear with me. Next, I want the vertical axis, and again, this is also going to be categories in reverse order. Here, I want the label position also high. Okay, that looks better. Let's do some formatting for the colors. So I'm going to go with this shades of brown and then select one of the bars, Control 1 to open the formatting pane if it's not already. Mine's open, so I'm going to set the series overlap to 100 and the gap width to 50. That's just going to make the bars a bit wider. Next, I'm going to select the budget columns, and in the formatting pane under fill, I want no fill, but I want a border. That's a solid line and a shade of brown, and we'll make it a bit wider. Let's add a chart title. This will be expenses by category. And let's just drag it over to the left. And I'll move the legend to the top. Let's just also position that on the same line as expenses by category. That gives us a bit more room for our bars. Okay, let's Control X to cut it out. Go to the report sheet and paste it in. I'm just going to hold down Alt while I resize it a little bit. Okay, the next chart shows your actual versus budget expenses over time. So to start off, I'm going to copy and paste this pivot table and then switch out the category for the year and month. By copying and pasting, I don't have to reapply the number formats and it's automatically connected to the slicer. So let's go and insert a column chart, and I'll Control X to cut, and we're going to go straight to the report sheet and we'll format it here. Starting with right clicking and hiding all the fill buttons. Then I want to select the vertical axis, and then in the formatting under axis options, I want values in reverse order. That just brings the columns down to the bottom of the chart. I'll select the columns and we'll set the series overlap to 100 and the gap width to 50. Let's go up to the Design tab and we'll change the colors with the same palette. And then with just the budget selected, let's go into the formatting, and I want no fill and a solid line. We'll just make it wider. Okay, we need to fix the horizontal axis because right now it's overlapping the chart. So let's go and do that. Under labels, we want it high. Everything's back to front because we've flipped the orientation because these are negative values. All right, let's add a chart title. This is expenses, and we'll just drag it across to the left, and we'll move the legend to the top. And now we have a bit more space for our actual columns, and we'll make the chart a bit wider. Okay, the next chart is the actual versus budget income over time column chart. So I'm going to go back to the Analysis tab, and I'll start by copying this pivot table, and I'll paste it here. Now I need to uncouple this pivot table from this slicer. So I'm going to right click the slicer, go into Report Connections, and I'm going to deselect pivot table 3. That was the last one I added. Click OK, and now you can see all the values have changed because it's not filtered for expense. This one needs its own slicer, so I'm going to insert a new slicer for the category type, and this time it's going to be income, and we'll resize it. Now I can insert a chart. Let's go again with another column chart. Let's Control X to cut it out, and we'll pop it in our report, and let me resize it a little bit to take up the space. Okay, let's right click, hide the fill buttons, change the color scheme on the Design tab. Now instead of brown, I'm going to go with green. This is income. Let's format the columns so that they overlap 100%, and the gap width is 50. And then we'll just select the budget column. Let's change it to no fill, and again we'll add a solid border, but this time in green. Okay, we'll add the chart title. This is income, and drag it across to the left and move the legend to the top and across to the right, and we'll make more space for our columns. All right, our last chart is the donut that shows the proportion of income by source. So on the analysis sheet, I'm going to copy this pivot table because it's already connected to my category slicer for income, and then we'll go and edit it. So instead of year and month, and I also don't need budget, I just want my actual by subcategory. And we can go ahead and insert a donut chart. Let's Control X to cut it out, and we'll place it in our report. Right, let's change the colors for this one to green as well. And I just need to go back to my pivot table, and let's sort this in descending order, or largest to smallest. And then we'll go back to our donut. All right, let's get rid of these field buttons, and we'll also get rid of the chart title and legend. And instead we're going to add data labels, and I'm going to go into more options. That's going to allow me to select what I want to see. So I want the category name, the value, and not the leader lines. All right, let's also make the donut hole smaller. So we'll make the hole size only 50%. And now I'll just left click and drag the labels up so they're close to the item that they relate to, but not on top of. All right, let's just make it a little bit smaller. Okay, that's the last chart. Next is the personal profit and loss statement. This is going to be one of your most valuable tools, enabling you to see which areas of your income and expenses need attention. So I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, from External Data Source. This allows me to choose the query that we built earlier for the data table. I'll click Open, and I want to put this on this sheet and in the cell that's currently selected. So I'll click OK. Let's just move these charts across a little bit so they're not overlapping the pivot table. Okay, here I want the category type and category, and the actual and the budget. And then on the Design tab, Subtotals, I want Show All Subtotals at the bottom of the group. Next, I need to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab. And under Fields, Items and Sets, I want to add a calculated field. And this is going to be for the variance. And the formula is actual, just double click to add them, minus budget. Then I'll click Add and OK. And now you can see I've got a variance column added to my pivot table. Let's rename the column headers. So this is going to be my personal profit and loss. This is actual. So just put a space at the front of actual. And again for budget and variance. And this just differentiates them from the field names. Now I'm just going to left click and drag income to the top. And then on the Design tab, I'm going to add some blank rows after each item. Now I just need to add a calculated item for the profit or loss. So I need to select one of the category type fields, and then on the Analyze tab, Fields, Items and Sets, Calculated Item. And here it's going to be income, surplus or deficit. And the formula is simply income plus expense. Remember, our expenses are negative values. Click Add and OK. And now we've got our new income, surplus, deficit. Click the minus button to collapse the underlying accounts. We don't need to see them. And right click and remove the grand total. Now on the Pivot Table Analyze tab, I can turn off the buttons. And then on the Design tab, I'm going to tone down the color scheme to make it a bit more in keeping with my report. Right, we need to format the numbers. So let's go into the number format, custom, scroll to the bottom, select the one we set up earlier, and rinse and repeat for each column. Applying the formats to one field at a time like this ensures that if the pivot table grows, the formatting goes with it. Let's make the profit and loss quicker to interpret with some conditional formatting icons on the variance column. So with one of the cells selected on the Home tab of the ribbon, conditional formatting, icon sets, I'm just going to go with this set here, and then click on this icon, and you want all cells showing variance values for category. Now I need to edit the rules, so back in conditional formatting, Manage Rules, double click to edit it. And then down here, I need to change this value to 0 and the type is number. So when the value is greater than or equal to 0, it's positive. And we change this to number as well. This becomes 0. And in fact, I don't want an icon for this level. So it's simply, if it's greater than or equal to 0, it gets a green tick. And if it's less than 0, it gets a red cross. Click OK and OK. And there we go. Now currently our actuals are under budget because we're looking at an entire year's worth of budget, but only up to October for our actual values. So we'll sort that out in a moment. Now it's a good idea to give each pivot table a name, and you'll see why in a moment. So on the Pivot Table Analyze tab, in the Pivot Table name box, we're just going to rename this one PT Profit and Loss. And then let's go to our Analysis tab and we'll quickly rinse and repeat for the other ones. Okay, back on the report sheet. So that you can filter the report for different time periods, I'm going to insert a timeline slicer. So I've got the profit and loss pivot table selected. On the Insert tab, I'm going to use a timeline. And I only have one field, which is date. Let's bring it up here into this space, and I'll resize it slightly. And let's just change the color quickly in keeping with our report. So now I've got a slicer that I can filter all the charts with, but it's currently only assigned to this pivot table. So let's right click and go into Report Connections. And here, this is why naming the pivot tables was so important. So we want it to filter the profit and loss, and we want it to filter the expense by category and the income donut. We don't want the actual versus budget, which are these two column charts, filtered because they already show all the months. If you start filtering the months, they kind of lose their context. So I always like to leave charts that show data over time unfiltered. I'll click OK. And now if I choose and only show up to October, which is what we have actual data for, and we look at the profit and loss, we can see that we're under budget on our variable income. We're over budget on discretionary spend and transport. And overall, we're $90 under budget. The last feature is the headline figures that give you at a glance information about the health of your finances. And these are just text boxes that are linked to cells that I've formatted. And then I've added an icon to make them easy to recognize. And you add icons from the Insert tab and then icons. These are available with Microsoft 365, but you could use any image and paste it into Excel. All right, let's go back to our file and we'll set them up. First, on the Analysis tab, I've got a couple of rows here ready to go to calculate my income surplus or deficit and my actual versus budget variance. And these are actually just going to link to the report page and my profit and loss pivot table. Notice in the formula bar, it inserts the Get Pivot Data formula for me. I don't have to do anything with this, but this formula is super robust because if the cell containing this value moves, for example, if new categories get added, this formula will follow the value wherever it goes. So I'm happy to use these kind of formulas. Let's press enter and let's repeat and go and grab the budget variance. All right, we've got our two figures ready to work with. Let's apply the formatting, Control-1, Custom, scroll to the bottom and double click. All right. By the way, you can use these skills to wow your colleagues at work with interactive reports. You can get your skills up to speed quickly with my Excel dashboard course linked to in the video description. Next, I want a message which states whether this is a surplus or deficit. I'm just going to use an if formula that says if this cell is greater than 0, then return the text income surplus. Otherwise, return the text income deficit. Close parentheses, and we're in surplus. Let's do something similar for the actual versus budget variance. So again, with if, we're testing whether this cell is greater than 0. If it is, then we're above budget. Otherwise, we're below budget. Close parentheses, and that's done. Now, technically, we could skip these two formulas and directly reference the profit and loss pivot table in this formula here. but I just thought it would be easier for you to follow if I put the values in here first. So back on the report sheet, I'm ready to insert my text boxes. So on the Insert tab, Shapes, and they're under Basic Shapes. Draw it in, roughly. And with the outer edge of the text box selected, type an equal sign in the formula bar, and then go to the Analysis sheet, and I'm selecting the cell that has my if formula in it. Press Enter, and now it comes through to the text box. I'll just make it a bit bigger. Now let's quickly format it with no fill and no outline so it disappears. Alright, I'm just going to hold down Control and copy that, and then we'll edit this. So this one is going to reference the value on the analysis sheet. Press Enter. There we go. Alright, let's just format these both centered. And next, I just need an icon that represents this. So let's go Insert Icons. And this is dealing with money, so let's look for some money. All right, let's use this one here. While I'm here, I'm going to grab a couple more. So I want a target. And let's also look for a house. This one. All right, so I've got 3 selected. Let's insert them all. And let's just resize them so they're 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And I'll just move them over there and this one up into position. Let's format it in this dark brown, and I'm just going to select the other 2 holding Shift and F4 to repeat the coloring. Okay, we can also color this text in the same shade of brown, and we might make it a little bit bigger. Okay, that's our first headline figures done. I'm going to fast forward while I insert the remaining headline figures. And like magic, they're done. Now I should point out that the expenses text boxes are referencing the profit and loss pivot table down here, and you'll notice I've repositioned it slightly and reduced the size of the donut chart. If you add more categories, you'll need to update these references and of course add another text box and icon for the new category. Okay, now that your report is done, let's run through how to update it for next month's bank statement. I've got some data here. Let's just pretend this is next month. I'm just going to copy it. And we'll go to the transactions sheet, and remember we're putting it on the very next line, so I'm just going to Control V to paste it in. Imagine you've already gone through and assigned the subcategories. All I need to do now is go to my report sheet, and on the Data tab of the ribbon, click Refresh All. Now keep an eye out on the column charts here because you'll see that the November data is going to be populated. And we're done. This updates all the queries and pivot tables that feed the report. So you can see it's super quick and easy to maintain. Now banks often export transactions to CSV, text or Excel files. So if you'd like to further automate the gathering of your bank transactions, check out this video on how to consolidate multiple files from a folder with Power Query and bring them into Excel. And if you'd like to see what else Power Query can do, check out this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.